Academy of the Philippines. Please join me in a warm welcome for Lieutenant General Galito.
Thank you very much, General Brown. Aloha. Aloha. In the Philippines, we say mabuhay. Mabuhay. Thank you very much. You learned a word in the Philippines. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a blessed afternoon to all. I am honored to have been given this privilege to speak before you and share my insights about land power, an insight from a small state. Small state, what I mean by small state, not physical small, but limited national power. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Association of the United States Army for, again, spearheading this seminal forum, one that reaffirms the vitality of our engagement and our shared commitment to a secured and stable Indo-Pacific. Over the past years, we have awakened to new realities that feel both sudden and familiar, from the widening vortex of conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, the tightening tension across Taiwan Strait, as well as the Korean Peninsula, and lately, the India and Pakistan. We see the status quo being assailed in all fronts. Definitely, these are not any more outliers, or isolated events. These are signposts of impending deeper shift, the return of contested geographies, intensifying competition for critical resources, the reorientation of socio-political paradigms, and more importantly, the redrawing of the global security architecture. For us, defense and military practitioners, all this points to one thing: increased prospect or likelihood of conflict. And when we speak of conflict, we instinctively fall back on land power, with all the attendant requirements and preparation needed to effectively generate it. Caught in the middle of this geopolitical maelstrom are not only major global and regional players, but also small states struggling to survive and protect their interests. And these states almost always mainly rely on their land power to generate the effects required to survive in a modern battlefield. In the dynamic and unforgiving realities of war, land power represents the most visible, viable, enduring form of deterrence by way of direct physical control. More importantly, land power, acting as a great equalizer, provides small states a credible means to assert agency and ensure their role in regional stability. Warfare, as Clausewitz aptly framed it, is not all about scale and size. Modern land warfare instead emphasizes the ability to maneuver in complex environments, seize and dominate key terrains, and turn geography into a force multiplier. Essentially, it is shaped by elements which are often overlooked in great power calculations: intelligent use of force, adaptability, and positional advantage that any small state can muster to assert its place in the modern battlefield. But land power can mean many things to different states. Mainstream land power theories, doctrines, and operating concepts that we know today have been derived mostly from perspective of strong and modern armies, which appear to have limited practical utility for small states like the Philippines. Unlike great and middle powers that can speak confidently about power projection, deterrence and control, fortified by their sprawling defense budget, small states operate from the outskirts of advantage and face a very different calculus. For starters, small powers operate with limited strategic magnitude and depth, smaller resources, and lesser tolerance to regional shocks. Their margin of error is also narrow. They cannot afford nonsensical doctrines, ambitious posture, or underutilized force structure. The burden and risks associated with land power employment by small states are proportionally heavier and more complicated. It is easy to imagine a military strong state employing land power for the purpose of prevailing in a modern battlefield. But for a small military power that is unfortunately threatened by a top-tier military adversary, it will really strain its military leaders' mental faculties, drain its economic resources, as well as test the limits of collective ingenuity and most especially national will. In essence, small states are compelled to behave differently in a way it generates and employ land power. If they are to compensate for major force and technological asymmetries, especially when facing a far military superior potential adversary. Today, generating and maintaining land power, as we know it, is very resource and technologically intensive undertaking, and therefore unsustainable for most small power in the long run. Let me briefly refresh you why. First, because of the continuing expansion of the battle space, the land force are compelled to invest in cross-domain capabilities, not only to support joint multi-domain operation, but also as a matter of basic force protection. As threat targeting land force packages could emanate from other domains. Second, because of emergence of game-changing technologies. On one side, the kill chain has been substantially abbreviated, with armies now striving to invest in capabilities that will allow them to see further, shoot farther, and hit better. On the other side of the coin, we also see the proliferation of kill chain disruptors, which are slowly being integrated as essential land force capabilities. Lastly, land power is increasingly being pushed to become more network-centric because of the immense data points, mostly from the multitude of sensors and effectors that need to be integrated. This kind of network architecture is very difficult for small powers to put up, maintain, and protect, especially in heavily contested environment. If small states will attempt to subscribe to this type of land force configuration, most of them will fall short, mainly due to financial and technological constraints. Against this backdrop, small states are faced with multiple dilemmas insofar as generating and employing land power that is responsive to a confronted threat while at the same time realistic and sustainable. First is sunk cost. Because of faulty capability choices in the past, arising primarily from poor appreciation of obtaining security environment or simply because of arbitrary or whimsical approach to capability development, some armies become tied up to some platforms of force types which would entail substantial financial loss to reverse. Not to mention the public backlash that may arise from such reversals, which is tantamount to acknowledging failure in strategic planning. Next is the threat of obsolescence. Rapid evolution of technology could make previously essential, yet resource-demanding capabilities useless over time. In some cases, long before these are fully paid, as such, small states are under constant threat of acquiring capabilities of declining relevance, while those that choose to hedge and wait are left with no capabilities at all. Another predicament is limited capability options. Small states rarely get access to top-notch weapons, which are necessary to become competitive in the modern battlefield. Even assuming that such states could financially afford it, defense hardware and softwares are available in the market, as well as other off-the-shelf platforms, are at least a generation older, which puts into question their efficacy and combat effectiveness when employed against top-tier states. There are also legal and policy restrictions to contend with. In some cases, certain legal policies restriction, locally and internationally, stand in the way from acquiring certain capabilities or even restricting their use, thereby impacting on the manner the Army chooses to fight. There are also instances where capabilities of other domains are prioritized over land power based on formulated defense and security strategies. These are not inherently wrong, but these are realities that nonetheless frame an impact on how small states generate and use land power. Next is coalition or partnership demand. Capability choices of armies are also influenced in no small measure by its defense allies and strategic partners, which they are expected to collaborate with and fight in times of war or any security-related contingency. In so doing, a substantial chunk of their resources needs to be rechanneled to specific capabilities to achieve system commonality and promote interoperability. For smaller states, unilateral posture is sometimes traded in exchange for a better collective stance. Lastly, competing priorities between internal and external defense. Some small armies, like the Philippines, are also simultaneously confronting internal threats, thereby causing not only unnecessary distraction, but also compete for time, effort, and resources. Aside from the constant dilemmas faced by small powers, they're also more prone to succumb to major pitfalls in employing land power. Thinking and fighting like Goliath, constant exposure with great powers sometimes gives small powers the illusion that it can also fight like one, endeavoring to match the adversary weapon for weapon, system for system, But in seeking parity, they end up developing unsuitable tactical instruments that look impressive on paper but stretches resources thin and lacks strategic breadth to win real wars. Instead, they need to think and act more like David, directly avoiding the adversary's strength while capitalizing on its unique competitive advantage. Developing a broad range of capabilities instead of specializing in a few essential ones. Heavily influenced by great powers, small powers also want to be good at everything instead of just focusing on specializing on what is essential to their chosen strategy. In trying to be strong everywhere, small states end up being weak everywhere. The essence lies not in ubiquity, but in purposeful readiness, knowing why, where, how, and with what to fight. Small states, therefore, should be more of specialists than generalists. They should be willing to accept some degree of risk in some non-priority areas just to be able to focus its resources where it matters the most. Focusing on modernization rather than force relevance. Small armies are prone to follow the path of great powers, pursue high-end technologies and sophisticated weaponries that it cannot sustain, and prioritize optics over operational relevance. As a result, by giving more premium to appearance over functionality, they end up being well-equipped but unable to fight the way they have chosen. Having said all this, I now put forward some proposition that could allow small states to punch above their weight, work around inherent capabilities, resource limitations, while constantly maintaining alignment between the ends and the means. Well, aside from the hybrid solution I mentioned earlier, do you know that Manny Pacquiao is returning to fight? By the way, Manny Pacquiao is our reservist. He is a brigade commander in the reserve. So, wait for him. Kidding aside, first, small state must be concept-centric but technology-enabled. Small states can afford to get entangled with a technology race, no matter how tempting it may appear. In fact, small powers should refuse to be drawn in this type of contest that is surely cannot win. So the most viable option is to be concept-centric, yet technology-enabled. It just means that they should make full use of any technology that they could lay their hands on, but it should not be made as a central or dominating theme in their land power strategy. History is replete with examples where innovative concepts were able to blunt the adversary's technology and numerical advantage. Next, small states should be able to identify early on their unique competitive advantage with respect to the kind of war they seek to fight. This could take the form of geographical feature, qualities and traits of the people, critical resources, critical competency, or any other national feature that could be leveraged to offset a potential adversary's strength and advantage. Another recourse is choose the way you intend to fight and be really good at it. Factoring one's unique competitive advantage, small states should clearly choose how to intend to fight and strive to be really good at it. This means channeling time, energy, and resources to areas that matter most. Focus will allow even modestly equipped armies to generate outsized effects through training, discipline, leadership, and conceptual clarity. Without this clarity, small states will be doomed to wars they cannot fight or adopt technology they cannot sustain. For instance, small states would be better off fighting asymmetrically, enforcing denial than aspiring for control, or being munition-centric instead of platform-centric with respect to the defense material investments. It is also crucial to secure positional advantage early. Well, this was thoroughly discussed earlier, and I wouldn't want to repeat it unless there are others who would want to hear it again, but I would rather give time to the question and answer after that. And related to this positional advantage, I would like to emphasize that cognitive positioning is as important as physical positioning. Cognitive positioning accords the employers, again, this is very important for us, legitimacy and morality of action, clarity of purpose, as well as splinters the enemy coalition and clouds the adversary's decision-making calculus. Lastly, small states should strive to expand their alliances and strategic partners. Small states could multiply their land power exponentially by continuously building a network of partnerships and alliances involving reliable and like-minded armies for a more purposive and impactful theater-level collaboration and integrated response. Consistent with the dictum that the whole is greater than the sum of parts, multinational collaboration offers an attractive option for small states that are in search for an efficient and effective way to deter and push back imperialist ambition and expansionist policies of regional bullies. This type of collaboration is usually concretized by way of reciprocal access agreement, synchronized theater-wide multilateral exercises and drill, force hosting and rotation, capability sharing, mutual logistics arrangement, and the like. In closing, the specter of conflict increasingly looms over the Indo-Pacific and beyond, shaping the strategies and capability choices of every nation in the region. As an anchor of stability in national security, armies should be able to forefront in assuring its people, as well as its partners, that it could prevail against any aggressor. But this assurance can only be deemed credible if matched with consistent demonstration of mastery in land power application. The arc of history bends towards the prepared, and victors favors the bold. For small states, they cannot afford to reduce into a mere passive observers in this seemingly never-ending power struggle occurring at a global scale, with their fate hanging on the balance at the constant mercy of irresponsible great powers, their interests threatened from time to time. Instead, they should take more proactive role on shaping regional security outcomes by leveraging nuanced land power strategies combined with extensive understanding of the operational environment. This should more than compensate for their inherent lack of means. In this uncertain time, small states must not merely strive to survive through land power, it should aim to prevail through it. Mahalo, my teammates, my partners, thank you very much. My buhay.
Sir, thank you for your presentation. Major Youngju, Army Fellow, AUSA. Question to you is specifically in regards to recent increasing tensions in the South China Sea.
Okay.
I guess I'm really interested in learning more about how is the Philippine Army adapting its force posture and capabilities. I know you touched that at the end a little bit, but specifically South China Sea, I'm very interested in hearing from you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, this has been officially published. The defense concept of the Philippines is about the comprehensive archipelago defense concept, which, particularly for the land force, should be able to project its force and its power within its economic interests, EEZ. With that concept, as mentioned earlier this morning, the Army is transitioning from an internal security perspective to territorial defense. And our plan is clear. We have to project our capability in partnership with the Air Force and Navy that we will be able to protect our interests. As to the platform and capability, it's in the list, and we would want it to be within our hands soon. I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much.
Sir, Jeff Van
Yes.
Antwerp,
Yes.
OPSO at USERPAC. You talked about the importance of the cognitive domain in obtaining positional advantage. What is your message to your soldiers and your service members and your population regarding kind of the cognitive ground that you are now competing for with multitude of adversaries, but the PRC in particular, as they try to demonstrate their power, infringing upon Philippine sovereignty? How do you communicate that, and how are you fighting that fight kind of internally?
Thank you very much. Very good question. Actually, this cognitive domain is very much challenging, especially for a small state trying to develop its economic power in order to develop its national power. When we say economics, you know, the back end, the backbone, seemingly we cannot get out of this connectivity. But what is important right now is for my countrymen to understand what is the national interest and national sovereignty. This, very unfortunate, as I mentioned earlier, well, most of you would know, for the past 5 decades and more, we were internally focused, trying to solve internal problems, particularly on the thought of communism and Islamic radicalism. All these two internal threats are because of, again, challenges in governance. Well, we know for a fact that is a factor. And of course, the quest to be able to protect the government interests. Now, as we move on, and as we realize that the interests of the Filipino people when it comes to its economic zone, our common people are being deprived of our interests, and it deprives the survivability of the Philippines. Because take note, the Philippines is made up of islands and we are archipelago. We do not follow the rules of UNCLOS, our nation would not exist as a nation. And how do we generate this will? We cannot say it's easy, but we little by little open up what's happening, what is being deprived and more importantly, a firm statement that we are protecting the interests of our country. I know it's very difficult for us, especially if you realize the structure, our economic structure, are managed by tycoons from the mainland. They're very difficult, but I know they're patriot Filipinos, but it's just the social mindset, the social cognitive domain that we have to change. That yes, you are here, but your interest should be for the Filipinos and our country to survive and be better. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Tim Keppel, we talked earlier about
Yes.
my basketball experience playing
Yes.
the Filipinos in Kuwait. I'm just curious about how the Army is working with the Philippine Coast Guard to kind of deter some of the Chinese maritime militia activities and the incursions into territorial fishing areas, and also how you're planning if you need to put troops forward and resupply them in those areas, because that's actually kind of a contested environment that we're trying to get better at.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Though this is about the Coast Guard, and Coast Guard in our case is not under the Armed Forces of the Philippines. But it used to be part of the Navy, and if they're part of the Navy, they have to implement the campaign of the Armed Forces. Unfortunately, they are under our Department of Transport. So nevertheless, looking at our situation, it's about our capability, our platforms. They have big ships, we have small ships. That's the situation. Hopefully soon, we will have bigger ships and we can ram on them. Well, as I've said, if we are at par, definitely they will not do this to us. We are small, they're doing it, but again, as like what I mentioned earlier, we have to tell our neighbors that a strong fence will build better relationship. A strong fence will protect each other's interests. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
You're right first.
This is me.
Huh?
Yeah,
Dr. Jetty. Oh my gosh. Good to see you.
Chairs are squishy.
That's Dr. Jetty, the Honorable Dr. Jetty. Wow.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Galindo, for those remarks. I am Julie Guerra, the Director of NCO and Soldier Programs at AUSA. To my right is SMA Singhji Singh from the Singapore Army. Command Sergeant Major Jason Schmidt, the USARPAC Command Sergeant Major. Sergeant Major Jay Garza, the Sergeant Major for the Army Futures Command National Capital Region Cell. And SMA Kim Felmingham, SMA for the Australian Army. At this time, we are your senior enlisted panel, and the theme is the development of NCOs to prevail in the land power domain. I'm going to open it up to you all for some opening comments on this topic. Go ahead.
Okay, firstly, thank you to AUSA and CSN Smith for having me as a member of the panelists. It's always an honor to be here. I think I'll be given the topic. I'll just touch on a bit of leadership, mentorship, training, and development strategy in the Singapore Army from our context. For the leadership development, in the Singapore Army, we always look at two key areas. One, first, we educate lifelong learning, and that is why we have a continuous learning and study scheme award, which offers our NCOs the opportunity to pursue diploma and degree programs, as we believe in embracing lifelong learning. Other than fulfilling the aspiration of NCOs, this is also an avenue for them to keep abreast with the latest technology changes and keep in touch with the mindset of the younger generations or Singaporean soldiers that are going to come in. Secondly, we also focus on our professional military education and training. For our PMET, for Singapore Army, is structured in a progressive manner. The concept is to equip them with the necessary skills and knowledge before they assume higher appointment within the organization. At the junior level, we focus on tactical leadership and skills provide them with the necessary skills to lead their soldiers at the front. As they progress through the ranks of NCOs, more leadership components are included in the course, and this prepares them to be leaders at the organization level. The NCOs of today are different compared to the past. Blended learning models are adopted to cater to different learning needs of our leaders. And this is important because if you don't do that, you will not be able to connect with the young soldiers coming in. And this is where the generation gaps comes in. And the next big thing is one of the most powerful tools is technology. If you don't embrace it, don't bring technology in, it doesn't elevate the level of training and you are not able to connect with the generations. And this is important because the younger generation are exposed to technology. And using VR, AR-driven wargaming, all these ways of teaching our young soldiers, it brings them in a different dimension. And with this tool, it allows us to replicate scenarios all within a controlled and safe space. So these are areas that I think are important in that sense.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sergeant Major?
Okay, thanks, Joey. Well, first, thanks to everybody who stuck around for the Senior Enlisted Leader Forum and AUSA for hosting this, and then importantly, my boss, General Clark, for putting the importance on the non-commissioned officer and our role in the Pacific. As you've probably heard a few times today, right, I'll go ahead and echo those comments, right? Land power is the strategic architecture that binds the fabric of the region, right? And the non-commissioned officer's role in the region is vitally important. Our support efforts through General Clark's people partnerships and Prevail are nested at how he goes about organizing the forces of the theater army for the joint force, generating that readiness, and then applying that readiness through those exercises that go on throughout the region, also known as Pacific Pathways, right? A lot of the initiatives that we're doing to help build interoperability, both tactical interoperability, which is done through those exercises, right? And intellectual interoperability, or the professionalization outreach of our partner nations' non-commissioned officer corps, occurred during the application of that readiness during those exercises. So hopefully some of the folks will look in the back. We do have the newly released Pacific Enlisted Leader Development Strategy version 2. We've been running it for about 1.5 years now. The first year was done under General Flynn, and then we just retweaked the strategy a little bit to make sure we're aligned with General Clark's small movements of people partnerships and Prevail. But when you look at those outreach initiatives, they all nest. People, we are a people business. The Army is people-centric. People tend to live on land, right? When you look at what goes on across the Pacific and you see 16 chiefs of Army here, 32 international delegates, and we have 16 foreign Army sergeants majors participating in this forum. So you can see that partnerships, the networks, and interoperability, tactical and intellectual, are very important to build as we look to help secure the architecture and the security of the Pacific region.
Great.
I'll yield back time, Joel.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's great. Jay?
All right. Thanks, Julie. And also want to echo thanks to AUSA, General Clark, for hosting this. And then I just seen a former boss of mine, the Honorable Dr. Jetty. Good to have you and good to see you again. I am Sergeant Major Jay Garza. I am assigned to Army Futures Command, but I'm not in Austin. I am actually in the National Capital Region inside the Pentagon. And as everyone in here should be aware, there's a merger that's occurring. Brian Hester, Command Sergeant Major Hester, was supposed to be here. He asked me to participate on his behalf, and I said, Hawaii? Absolutely. Waikiki? Yes, Honolulu, I will be there. And then he asked me to speak on a panel. And I don't dance, but I did the quickest moonwalk you could ever think. Just teasing. Ryan Hester gave me an opportunity to come here, speak on behalf of the command, and so I'm going to give it 100%. And so the modern battlefield, it's continuing to change. And the expectation for our NCOs is to absolutely be flexible and adaptable to that change. If we're going to win the next fight, it's really going to be the non-commissioned officer that is going to win that fight for us. And some of you might say, well, Sergeant Major, you're biased because you're an NCO. But I would argue that, and I know that you've heard on multiple occasions, the officers, the warrant officers, the non-commissioned officers, and our enlisted say, in fact, 4-star general officers have said that the secret sauce of our Army is the non-commissioned officer corps. That's the secret sauce. In sheer numbers alone, right? I got the opportunity to get access to Vantage. I know most of you know what Vantage is. It's a data platform. It's got all kinds of information in it. And so as I was scrolling through Vantage, I saw the percentages of enlisted officers, NCOs, warrant officers. And it told me that 70% of our Army is enlisted. So the development of our non-commissioned officers is absolutely crucial, especially inside of this theater of operation. The last thing I'll hit is really the partnerships. So Sanju right here is a class 62 of the United States Army Sergeants Majors Academy. Him and I are classmates. Now they're currently at class 75. In fact, class 75 graduates in June, and class 76 shows up in August. So we've been doing this for a while. So the importance of fostering the relationships with our partners, absolutely crucial. We know that we never go to combat or conflict alone. We will always be partners when war is called for us. And then Kim also, now she's class 58.
Why are you dating people on the stage, Jay?
Well, she's been doing this a little bit longer. So she mentors us on the stage. And so having been an ASCC Command Sergeant Major, in fact, we were partners with General Clark, out in the CENTCOM AOR, USR CENT, the partnerships that we created with the countries, I won't name the countries, but the fact that we could get ABO, we could get pretty much everything that we needed, helped us respond to the things that are going on in the Middle East. And so again, I say all that to say the enlisted corps, absolutely crucial. AFC and the latest technologies, we got to be able to integrate the latest technologies, software systems, robotics. NCOs have to be masters of that. And then our partnerships. We have to make sure that we continue to foster those partnerships if we enter conflict, especially in this theater.
Okay, thank you. Esme?
Thank you, aloha and g'day teammates. Thank you to Sergeant Major Smith, gentlemen, and certainly AUSA for providing this opportunity to talk about something that we're all very passionate about. And if we get it wrong, there are going to be catastrophic consequences. And that is the development of our NCO Corps. As you've already heard from Lieutenant General Stewart this morning, our Australian Army is on a journey of continual adaptation. We remain focused on the battlefield in the littoral, the ability to fight and win in the shallows, on the beaches, in the rivers and jungles that dominate this unique and complex region that we all occupy. Add to this some of the most densely populated areas, and one could argue that this is the most challenging and demanding terrain in the world. I've briefly described the road that we all have an obligation to prepare our non-commissioned officers for, as they lead soldiers, enable commanders, and through confidence and courage, fight and win. Throughout this confidence, I've been reminded constantly that in order for us to deter conflict, we need to capitalise on the value proposition of persistence. a powerful demonstration of persistence that occurs every day occurs through our NCO Corps. Therefore, our non-commissioned officers need to be well trained both individually and collectively. Training needs to be harder. It certainly needs to be wetter and more focused, with the needs to be wickedly challenged at echelon. Training needs to increase readiness and, as described this morning, not to consume it. And it must demand resilience, not only of our non-commissioned officers, their teams, but also the families that support them. For these reasons, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to discuss something that is important to me. And whilst we focus on the non-commissioned officers and the roles and responsibilities that they have, ultimately, we need them to thrive and survive in the Indo-Pacific region, to support the joint force and also during war. Enhancing interoperability across people, technology and doctrine with our partners is going to be critical for all of our success. It will also enable our NCOs to respond promptly in any tactical situation, and should war occur, enable them to act decisively and swiftly in contact. But it is not just enough for them to be experts. Our non-commissioned officers need to thrive and be enabled to adapt pace. During training, it is important that they must have a safe environment to fail and fail fast, whilst also providing the opportunity for them to learn quickly. As highlighted by General Clark yesterday and reinforced by Major General Collingburn today, every exercise must be approached as if it were a rehearsal. It changes the mindset. Rehearsals must be designed to test the NCO's leadership, their knowledge, their drive, their empathy, their passion and their compassion. In today's environment, all non-commissioned officers must be personable, credible, be able to translate word into action, and they need to be optimistic because war is going to be hard. For me, the escalation in today's operations, activities and investments to rehearse with our coalition partners is positive. And I would argue that the soldiers and Marines, sailors and aviators of today can adapt far quicker than what I have seen throughout my, and thanks for the age reminder, almost 40 years of service. This is why at the strategic and at the operational level, we must pay heavy weight to exercise design at echelon. Rehearsals with multiple reps and sets not only demonstrate collective will, persistence and presence, it is what will make the difference in surviving the first contact. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So you deserve that, by the way. Just saying. So a lot of discussion already about the inherent responsibility of ensuring that NCOs are developed properly, not just at echelon, but to ensure that those people are here to backfill all of us as we go on to the next chapter in life. So with the theme of prevailing, I wanted to start with you, Jason. The Indo-Pacific presents a unique operational environment characterized by vast distances, complex terrain, and a diverse range of potential adversaries. How can leveraging emerging technologies, specifically those focused on distributed operations and enhanced situational awareness, empower NCOs to effectively lead small units and maintain lethality in this challenging theater?
Yep. So I think, again, when you think of one of the most arduous environments, the Indo-Pacific is, right? You heard it, Hollywood to Bollywood, polar bears, the penguins. I call it, the coldest to the hottest regions, from Alaska out to the Pacific out there in Oceania. Technology is always an enabler, right? But the other piece you got to remember with technology is that technology will fail you, right? So the first thing I say is embrace technology, right? You have artificial intelligences out there. data analytics. We're doing a lot of things in our education system, our non-commissioned officer professional development system. Robotics, you heard Joaquinto talk about that.
Right.
I also think that, you know, as non-commissioned officers, we need to stay true to what we owe our commanders written into doctrine, which is to be masters and train individual small teams, units, and crews, right? If we understand how to do all of that, when we are trained to be able to incorporate technology and leverage it to our advantage, should that fail in the Indo-Pacific, right, because we have those harsh environments, then we're going to be able to meet the demands of the large-scale combat operations in a multi-domain environment. So my answer would be to embrace it, leverage it, right, but always have a backup, right? If you're planning and doing something digitally, you probably should have an analog backup to do that.
Oh, 100%. I think, you know, as a career intel professional, I remember, you know, the acetates and putting everything when you were doing your decision-making, everyone's nodding, you remember this. And then when the Intel enterprise started going back to that, because it was a lost skill that people just didn't know how to do anymore because computer systems have been doing it for us for years. So I think it's very important to have that analog backup. Jay, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I could add just a couple of things. And I like that Jason said NCOs have to embrace the latest technologies. AI, you know, next generation C2. You got to embrace it. You can't run from it. You got to run towards it because it's going to make the difference. But you can never get away from being brilliant at the basics. You always hear the SMA talk about discipline. You always hear about individual soldier task, warrior task, and battle drills. Whether the environment changes or not, the fundamentals will not change as long as we continue to push and train our soldiers on those fundamentals. Discipline matters, right? If we train them on discipline, individual soldier tasks, those warrior tasks and battle drills, then they will make it until we can get technology back up and running.
Okay, I'll just pipe in. I think I agree with Jay and CSN Smith. Technology is not about replacing our traditional field training. It is an enabler. It helps us to fight better, but the important thing for NCOs is warfighting skills. And this is what is very important to us. We need to go back to basics, make sure the soldiers learn the basics and they are strong in it, and that's where technology comes in and it helps them to fight better. And this is how we find the balance. Because if we let technology take over our warfighting skills, then we have a problem where you don't have technologies and you look at all the soldiers going for coffee breaks and don't know what to do, you know. Those are situations that we don't want to happen, and we have to be careful about this.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add, you know, technology, we can't run from it. I agree totally. But, you know, in today's environment, which is no different than history, soldiers, NCOs, and our officer corps have got to do what they can with what they've got where they are. Because you're never going to have everything you think you need. You are never going to have all the people that you would like. So we have to get over ourselves about a perfect world, a better environment, and do what we can with what we've got where we are.
No, that's great. I think that's crucial to remember because there's always going to be, you know, we've all lived through the we get everything, sort of, and then where we get nothing. And so I think being able to balance that, especially as leaders inside of the formations, when there's good times and lean times, is reminding, you know, how we kind of navigate through that as leaders. I'm going to pivot to continuous transformation, which I know all of you will have thoughts on this. So, Jay, Futures Command has spoken about continuous transformations in 3 time horizons. The first is modernization, which I feel like everyone's doing right now that's happening, called transformation in contact. How does this translate to everyday life as an NCO?
Yes, so transformation in contact, you got deliberate transformation, then you got concept-driven transformation. Deliberate transformation, no different than it was a couple of years ago, modernization. AFC used to have the 31+3 programs, 31+4. Not sure why they didn't just say 35, but yeah, I wasn't sure either, other than the RICTO. I mean,
because it's Futures
I
Command.
understand it.
They're one step ahead.
But transition in contact is actually a brilliant plan, right? And I think the chief, exceptional. So what we end up doing, NCOs have to be flexible and adaptable to the latest technologies, to the latest equipment, to the latest concepts, and they got to integrate that into their teams, into their squads. And what we end up doing is applying or inputting 11, 12 different types of systems. We give them to a brigade combat team. They go out to a CTC rotation. In fact, I visited JMRC. The 10th Mountain was out there, one of the brigades. They were iterating back and forth. They were using the systems. It was bottom-up feedback, bottom-up innovation. They were talking to our industry partners, making modifications. And the reason we're doing that is because we can't wait on modernization or deliberate transformation. We have to, just like Kim mentioned, we have to do what we've got right now. And so and I'll use the motto from the 2nd Infantry Division, if we have to fight tonight, or if we have to fight today, then it's the equipment that those soldiers are training on right now that are creating the TTPs, that are creating the SOPs, and informing larger efforts in our Army. That's what we got. That's what we're going to go with. That's what we're going to fight and win with. So TIC is actually, in my mind, a brilliant plan. And I'm not just saying that because it's the Chief of Staff of the Army's plan.
I don't know. I feel like you are. I feel like he's not listening, but if he is, gold star for you. Did anyone want to add on to that?
I can say something. I think transformation is something that you can't run away from it. You need to keep pace with what's the technology coming in, and that transformation will definitely hit you sooner or later. But the most important thing is, in line with transformation for the NCOs, mentorship is very important. When I say mentorship, it's always how you pass the baton from the senior NCOs to the junior NCOs. And this is important because it ensures the custom and tradition of the organization is succeeded from generation to generation. Because the NCOs are the one that's going to helm these transformations, and they will know what's the origin of different MOS, how you're bringing up, how you're going to fight, and how you're going to bring this transformation into the system, and how the newer soldiers are going to pick this up and going to fight the next battle. And this is important in our, if you look at Indo-Pacific, this how are we going to transform.
And we do have 2nd Brigade of the 25th is a transformation and contact brigade, and looking at some of the unique things that they're messing with, whether it's new formations, new equipment, new ways of employing tactics with all of that is vital, right? Not just for that one brigade, but as those 3 brigades across our Army go through transformation and contact. Because not all are going to look alike, and not everybody's going to have the same type of equipment, and not everybody has the same type of needs like we have in the Pacific, vice another different theater or threat, right? So those are important to not wait for the perfect solution, but to help inform our Army to transform as it goes along.
Yeah, I think and I'm curious about what the leadership messaging is when you talk about how one is not going to look like the other. So what 101st got, 25th ID is not going to get, so on and so forth. And you pick a division, pick a brigade that's part of this. So what kind of messaging do you, from the top, push down so that they understand that it is unique and that's why it's not the same?
Yeah, well, my message, as you heard kind of Joaquino talk about earlier, right? The sack of gold or resources are not, endless. They're finite, right? So, what you have, you fight the Army you have, not the Army that you want. So, again, be masters at what you got. If you're transforming in contact and you happen to be a unit, receiving that equipment, be masters at whatever that new technology may be, but have a redundant means of employing other equipment.
Yeah. So when we're going to, because of this panel, it's very unique, and I love that. The partnerships that we have with our coalition allies is critical to fighting and winning in this theater. Kim, how do we ensure that NCOs are equipped to work seamlessly with coalition partners in a dynamic operational environment?
Yeah, look, great question. And, we tapped on it briefly before about being brilliant at the basics. I think we need to acknowledge that the people that are in their own AO across our entire region know that AO better than anybody. So we have to be willing and open to having that dialogue and that understanding when we step into somebody's AO. It's going to be different. The challenges are different. The people and culture diversity is different. So making sure that training right down to the NCO level so that they are well equipped to succeed in that human domain is really important. And that absolutely breaks down some of those challenges when it comes to that dynamic environment, but also working with our partners and working with our partners early.
Yeah.
If I can add, I think the NCOs absolutely have to think interoperability. And we got to flatten lines of communication, right? And we got to seek opportunities to work with other units, to work with our partner nations, to share those TTPs that we talked about, to share those SOPs. It's crucial to continue to foster those relationships. I mean, we spent about a half a day yesterday up at the Lightning Academy, where you've got partner nations, you've got partners in their instructors that are teaching. I think one was from Brazil, where there's the Amazon jungle. And they're sharing all of those TTPs. I mean, the real jungle, Amazon jungle, right? And so just fantastic work. So again, fostering.
And you don't want to try to build a relationship and contact and you can't, surge trust, right? So the more we exercise together, the more we do joint exchanges together, the more we network, the more we attend events like this to strengthen partnerships and relationships, the better off I think the fabric's going to be of the architecture in the Pacific.
Yeah. So, Singji, you were talking about, the development and the life cycle of an NCO inside of your Army. Yeah. I really wanted to, you talked about some of the talking points that you sent were about how NCOs must be resilient, adaptable, and culturally aware leaders. Why is that important for your soldiers? And then kind of to your point, Kim, about the human domain and being emotionally intelligent in this space, like why is that important from your position?
Okay, I think from Singapore position is important because you need to study the generation of soldiers coming to you. The present generations are built up in a different way. They are actually exposed to more social media technology. And you see them coming to the Army in a different mindset. So you have to be very careful how we streamline them or how we train them to be soldiers. Resilience is one of the biggest things that we need to tackle because olden days, most of us are thrown out of the house to go and play in the wilderness, play. But nowadays, the parents are keeping the kids at home, where playing computer games and all that. So you need to study the generation. And this is where we find that the challenges we have. Building resilience in the present NCOs and soldiers, this is one of the biggest things we need to do. And this is one of the things that we are going to tackle. And this is how we bring the soldiers up to skill. Because when you go to war or you go to any exercise, resilience plays a big part. If your NCOs or soldiers don't have the resilience, you see them falling out as soon as they start the start line. And this is one of the biggest worry that we have, that when you reach the start line, you're only 50% because the rest of them are worried, give that kind of mindset. And this is some of the training that we have to pick out and ensure that they are ready. And if you look at it, cultural sensitive is in Indo-Pacific. There's so many cultures, so many different regions, and it's also important to inculcate this into them. And we have a very good platform. We have bilateral exercises, multilateral exercises. We have soldiers mixing up from different countries. And this is a very good platform where we actually can build a resilience and you indoctrinate them in the different cultures of different countries. And when you see them coming back from the exercise, you see a different soldier coming back to you. And these are, I think, a very good platform for us.
Resilience isn't just about doing something that's difficult, walking away and say, I'm resilient. It is something that has to be practiced and practiced and practiced. And it's not just about the individual. It's about the resilience of the team, but it's also about the resilience of everything that is a support mechanism around them. And that includes families. And I don't think we do that well. I think for the Australian Army, we're on a journey of building resilience so that when that scaffolding of service falls away, they are still able to cope with the challenges of just day-to-day life. We had an assumption for a long time that the soldiers that we were getting from Civilian Street were, you know, they knew how to eat, they knew how to sleep, they knew how to have relationships. We've got to build them and make them more resilient and understand what it is that affects them the most for us to get the best out of them. So it's bigger than just an exercise. That absolutely helps. Tough training helps. And in my experience, soldiers want tough training. They don't want to sit around, go through the actions and survive the exercise. They actually want to get something out of it. And for Australians, that's the stuff they talk about in the pub afterwards. It's not about what they did that was boring. They want to be challenged, and that's our responsibility as leaders and commanders to make sure that they are challenged at every opportunity.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So I'm going to get to some of the questions because what you just said came from one of the participants here in the crowd. So for both you, Sinji, and for you, Kim, during yesterday's panel discussion, lethality and resilience was one of the key components of resilience was the focus on the families. And you started to talk about that. So how are you addressing that within both of your armies?
Look, it's probably common knowledge around here that we've just gone through the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. As an organisation, the Australian Defence Force, 95% of the organisation leave with a great lived experience, but that's not what the Royal Commission was about. It was about that 5% of the populace that left with a horrible experience, not only affecting them physically, mentally, but also affecting their families. So we've got better, but there's always more work to do. And, you know, the importance about resilience of a family that is going to support not only when we are and how I and certainly other people describe, up until this point in my career have been wars of choice. The next war or the next have been conflicts of choice. The next conflict that we're talking about is a war. It's going to involve not only those people that wear uniform, but also those families and the countries that we live and occupy. So if we don't build resilience as a nation, we're going to have a tough time, not just organisationally, but also as nations. There's some great studies coming out of Ukraine where, you know, currently, and the Australian Army is no different, if we have people that have mental health issues, suicidality, we tend to bring them out of the fight. Over in the Ukraine, they don't have that option. And they've got doctors that are looking at ways that they can continue to keep them in the fight, and with really good results. And I would argue, putting my medical background forward, is that removing somebody from the fight, from the team, is the worst thing we can do. How do we then keep them in the fight, keep them in the training, while still not hindering that medical or that mental health condition that they might have?
Okay. I think in Singapore it's a bit more challenging because we are a conscript army. So we are very careful how we train our soldiers because we need to balance the families. And if you look at statistics, Singapore also has a very high mental issues coming from school. The school education in Singapore is very stressful. And when they cross over to serving their 2 years, it drives another stress factor to them. So these are areas that we are very watchful because, like you said, you need a balance to train them as a soldier, make sure they go back to the family with one piece, at the same time getting the trust from families. So these are areas that we are very watchful. We look after that. And since last year, we embedded a resilience training program in our boot camp. So when the soldiers come in for the first time, within the 3 months, we introduce resilience training for them, and we have seen shift in their thinking. And then a lot of soldiers, especially conscript, they pick it up faster, and it helps them be a better person. And as they move on in the leadership school, we also put in a resilience package so that the commanders, the young conscript commanders, are able to connect with the soldiers and guide them along the way. And also the officers and the NCOs are able to cope themselves, because it takes two hands to clap. So these are areas that we are very concerned in, but we are always looking at seeing how we can tide this over and ensure that we have a parity or equalize everything. Soldier gets trained, family is looked after, and they have the assurance that their sons are looked after.
That's great. I think those are all really good points. And continuously talking about the resilience, and what you were saying, Kim, about leaving them in the fight while also triaging what they're going through is part of how they actually become more resilient. So that's great. Jay, in the beginning of the presentation, you had referred to Vantage data of 70% of the Army was made up of NCOs, or enlisted, I think is what you said, right?
Enlisted.
What are some unique ways that you are utilizing that data to positively impact the 70%?
Using the data
Yes.
to positively impact,
That's 70%, yeah, from where you are.
So now this is my personal opinion.
Right.
So I take a very intangible approach, right? Sometimes I think the Army gets things wrong. And I've stated this many times, even in the SMA's office. We focus so much on tangibles, right? Red, amber, green charts, metrics, and we want the right numbers to say the right things. I think if we were to focus more on intangibles like good order, discipline, cohesion, pride, trust. I think if we master the intangibles, somehow that will generate the tangible readiness that our Army is requiring. And so that's the approach that I take. I go after intangibles early and often. I try to get to know the soldiers. I try to share as much information that I am receiving with the soldiers, keeping them informed. And there's some pride to take about being 70% of the United States Army. Right?
It's funny because you say that, some of the things that you listed that you were saying, it's not tangible because there's no metric on a chart. And I've always said that one of the most tangible ways that you can see and view discipline is in a formation. Literally just tell them to go to parade rest or the position of attention, and they're not supposed to move, and they're not supposed to, no secondary movements, and just little things like that. You can measure pride by how the organization, the footprint looks. You can measure discipline by looking at a formation. So I think that, to your point, that it's intangible in the sense that there's no way to
But it passes the eye test.
Yes, but it passes the eye test. You can be like, there's some issues here. There's discipline issues here. You can see it before you even go into the formation. So it is tangible in a sense, but yeah, to your point, it's not like we can put it into a system.
Well, I'd also offer that, pretty good timing that the chief released FM 7-1 last night, right, the profession, and a lot of those things that you were just talking about, pride, cohesion, discipline, is written in a very well succinct document that kind of lays out what our Army needs, right? So I don't think that's just opinion of yours. I think that our Army's in need of that as well.
It mentioned units. It mentioned the Curhees.
Yeah.
It mentioned the Black Lions. I mean, those units got the intangibles right. If we get the intangibles right, we'll do whatever we want.
And the ones that don't, there's also books about them to that point. So for all of you, how are we teaching NCOs to identify and develop talent in an environment that is ahead of doctrine in skills like 3D printing, UAS, FPS fielding, and flying, etc.?
Yeah, well, so I'll say, when you reference 3D printing, there's a lot of experimentation going on that with some of the troop or transformation and contact brigades. So when you talk about embracing new technologies, as we discussed earlier, using artificial intelligence, looking at data. Part of one of the things the SMA is looking at in our non-commissioned officer professional development system is layering in data analytics and how to leverage data to increase readiness, right? And he's going to put that in at all levels through there, make it sequential and progressive. So I think some of those are examples of how we're using some new emerging technologies to help encourage the use of technology.
Yeah.
I think 3D printing is something very useful. But I think the other thing about 3D printing, and another thing that in Singapore Army we advocate for our NCOs is innovation. Because when you allow your NCOs to be innovative, you will see creative ideas coming out. And some of these ideas is where you can use it and 3D print certain things. And that's how you see the soldiers are given the birth or given the space to be creative, and you see training changes.
Right.
And training changes, and it becomes a bit more, I won't say fun, but the soldiers picked up. And they start to learn that this is how I want to be trained, how I can see things differently. Because if you use the same lens in training and keep on training them the same way we've been trained, it becomes very mundane. And then the challenge is sooner or later complacency comes in, and then you have safety risks. But when you allow the senior NCOs and junior NCOs to look at innovation, how training can be conducted in a different way, but with safety risks eliminated, you realize that you can meet everything, and that makes the training more interesting, and it connects with the soldiers on the ground, because now the NCOs have a say in how the training is conducted, what they can do, and how they can bring the message across to the soldiers.
For me personally, I'm the ambassador for Makerspace. These are small areas on our major bases that enable soldiers to go in whenever they want, and they're coached and mentored by very intelligent people how to think differently and solve their own problems at the tactical level. This has been going on for a couple of years now, and I have a look at the data, I have a look at the stats, the occupation, and I wish we could have more. Everything from two-star generals down to the youngest digger, solving the problems that they have, and in a lot of cases developing a small bit of a kit that makes their job easier, that we can then multiply and get it out to the soldiers to make everybody's job easier. And in some really good examples, it actually saves us money as an organisation, which is a really positive step forward.
No, that's always good.
So if I can just,
yeah, of course,
from AFC. So there's all kinds of innovation cells across our Army right now, and 3D printing is something big, and they're creating a repository with specs so that soldiers can actually print certain parts that take, and sometimes they're long lead parts, and so they can get the part, they can put the part on the Humvee or whatever platform that they have instantly and continue mission instead of waiting. So a lot of great innovation happening across our Army.
No, absolutely. This is also for all of you. You are at the intersection of multi-generational armies, X, Millennial, Gen Z. How are you approaching the phenomenon of generational culture and public service? Why don't you start, Jay? Because you look scared. I feel like we should start with him.
All right, one more time, if you could just.
You're at the intersection of multi-generational army right now at the intersection with X, Millennial, and Gen Z. How are you approaching the phenomenon of generational culture and public service?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm wondering who asked it. It's our Major of the Army, Dan Daly.
Oh, our fellow, Mr. Young.
Yeah, that's a tough question. As I get my thoughts together, you want
maybe
yeah,
I'll dive in.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put the rose on you.
No,
but-
no, no.
I think in every army now you see there's multiple generations, you know,
Right.
from the older generation, baby boomers, millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, all this. The challenge is how to get the seniors to communicate with the Gen Z in their language. That's the biggest challenge. If we can get all the 4 generations to communicate to their language, then it makes the job easier.
Right.
The challenges for us is some of our senior NCOs are not able to translate the message to that generation in their language, and that's where you lose their communications. You lose that soldier on the ground.
Right.
And this is important because as we move on, you will see our army will always have different generations. And we have many tools out there, but the problem is if we don't know how to communicate between different generations, you will never win the battle. And this is important because as we move forward in the bigger army, you need to be able to connect the dots between the generations and make them understand each other. And the senior NCOs need to understand how to, switch their faces, switch their attitude, and communicate with them. That is the biggest battle. Once they learn, the rest is easy because the younger soldiers will understand what is communicated to them, what the senior soldiers want from them. The rest, easy peasy. Everything gets done.
And I would say that, the problem's ours. It's the old folks, right? This generation of soldiers out here, they're just fine. They're smarter than we were. They're intellectually curious. They have access to information that, 30 some odd years ago, I had to check a book out from, the platoon sergeant, turn back in the next morning. So it's not really them. And every generation, as you heard him say before that, the World War I guys said World War II weren't any good, Korea, Vietnam, vice versa, all that. So I think it's really us learning how to understand them, right? Because it's not like they're any less motivated. They're motivated, right? They're just more curious. They're intellectually curious because they have access to more data than we did. We didn't run around with phones, right? We weren't able to read multiple sources, quote things. I mean, if my platoon sergeant said, pick up the rock, move it over there, and 2 hours later, move it back, that's what was going to happen. I wasn't going to ask why. What's the point? How come? Is there an out? But again, learning how to communicate, I think, is what Sanji was saying. I mean, I agree with that, but it's really us. It's the old folks that need to fix their stuff. Generation's just fine.
All right, I think I'm ready to answer.
Okay, all right, let's do it. Let's go. I'll mess it up.
So I don't think, again, this is one of those things that we don't necessarily get right because we don't communicate well. We don't, the Army says clear, concise, to the point. And let's just use the triangle and the hierarchy of our Army. So initially you come in at the lower echelons, and what the Army tells you to do, it says get to the top as fast as you can. And so what do? You come in, you try to get to the top, all the way to the top, all the way to the top, all the way to the top. And what do? They give you a diagram. They give you a career map. And so you go to badge producing schools, you go to Ranger School, you go to PME, you make sure that you do everything you're supposed to do to get to the top. And then when you get to the top, there's this thought, this false assumption that everybody underneath you, right, works for you. Wrong. And see, if I was king for a day, I'd flip that triangle upside down. Reality is now everybody's at the top, and it's your responsibility to lead, to teach, to coach, to mentor everyone that is above you. And if you do it right, then they will be successful. And their success will equate to your success. We have a hard time of selling that to soldiers. We work for them. And if we can articulate that, and we can sell that to them, and they can believe it, then they'll run through this wall for you. And so, just some thoughts. Thanks for giving me extra time.
You're very welcome. I'm here for you. I'm sorry, Major.
Just chip in a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to expand on the word that Jason brought, the why. If you look at the generation now, they are always asking why. Why me? Why not you? Why this? And this is very important because the olden time, like what you said, the olden time in Singapore Army was, I asked you to go to a tree, he would just go. No question asked. Now the generation is different. They'll ask you the why. But the important thing is when you give them an instruction, to me is, I always tell my senior NCOs, you don't tell them the why, you tell them the purpose of it. What's the purpose? And this generation, once they understand the purpose of why you're giving them an instruction, why it's being done this way, automatically you win them over. Then they understand it why. Because this is the biggest issue. We always tell them to do something, but we ask them why, but we don't tell them the purpose of the job. And this generation, like what we already mentioned, they are exposed to social media. When you tell them something, they'll just Google and say, is it right or wrong?
I have a 19-year-old.
And next one, they'll just question you.
Yeah.
So these are things that we learn over time, not only the why, the purpose. And then the rest is simple.
Okay. Yes, Kim.
I'm going to be a splitter in the group. I understand around the different generations, but I don't buy into it probably as much as other people. You know, when I joined the Army, I was trained by Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that they would have said, what were recruiting thinking? But our training systems work. And training also provides us to remain relevant. Just because you get to the next rank does not mean that you are relevant. And that is something that you have to have self-discipline about to be relevant. The training systems that we all have constantly evolve and adapt. And, you know, that brings people on the journey, but I totally agree with the purpose. Soldiers, at all times, they might not have asked directly to the, well, I didn't necessarily ask directly to my trainers as a young soldier, but I was always curious about the why. And we owe it in that communication space to be clear, understand the purpose, because when there is purpose, there is the desire to do what is right and do it well. And I don't think that is any different for any nationality that certainly is in this room today.
No, I would agree with that. I think, I mean, I remember coming in the Army in 1994 and the senior NCOs saying the same things that are being said about the kids that are coming in the Army now. And so I think it's just, that's part of it too, is that everyone had it harder. Walked, you know, to school both ways in the snow, uphill, you know, against the wind. So it's part of, also part of our Army generation. It's that there's the constant, you know, what were they thinking? What were they doing? But it's, you know, NCO's job is to train the next generation. So with that, with the rapid advancement in technology and the increasing threat of peer adversary capabilities, what challenges do each of you see with training your NCO Corps to maintain pace? And I'll start with you, Jason.
Challenge, yeah. Well, you know, with any piece of technology comes obviously limited resources, right? So availability to that new piece of technology, the ability to employ it in the theater, right? Sometimes when you get a new gizmo out there and you try it in an environment like ours in the Pacific, it might not operate as advertised, right? You know, developmental testing and you know, those types of things in a perfect environment may not work in the humid environment or the cold environment of the Arctic or the heat of the Philippines. So it's A, availability of some of that tech and gizmos, and then B, you know, how to employ it, you know, purposefully to enable whatever the mission is that the commander is trying to support out there. Keeping pace with it, I mean, there is so much technology, there's new tactics, there's new things, right? Keeping pace is important, but I also go back to ensuring that you have a redundant backup plan, right? Not only digitally, but analog. And
right.
A good analogy I didn't pile on earlier, right, is you sometimes forget all the little things when you get a new piece of kit, and we'll use the GPS for an example, right? We lost our ability to not only navigate with a compass and a map, right, but we also lost a few other skills that people thought the compass was only for navigating, right?
Right.
It's put in a range card. That range card feeds a sector section sketch. That feeds a company defense plan, right? It was used for call for fire. A lot of those individual skills atrophied over the years because of technology, right? So that's kind of what my thoughts on, you know, keeping pace, yes, embrace, do, access, making sure it works in the environment, but B, also making sure that, you know, the individual skills are not lost along the way.
Right.
Whatever new piece of emerging technology comes out.
Right. back to that analog discussion and getting, the back to basics that you talked about.
Yeah.
So, Kim, did you want to add something?
From an Australian Army perspective, we have the Army Order, and that could relate to any mission for any country. I often ask soldiers, is what you're doing today in line with the Army Order? And if it's not, why are you doing it? We don't have more time. We can't buy time. Everywhere you go, hey, how you going? Oh, I'm busy. Everybody's busy. I don't use the B word anymore. The question I ask is, are you concentrating on the right areas? Because we can be busy, but we are not necessarily moving forward. So, we need to check ourselves and remind ourselves, are we concentrating on the right areas in order to achieve the mission?
Right? Yeah.
I'll just add on. I think the key word you hit is, Kim, the word time. Time is our biggest enemy. Technology is always moving ahead. You have a standard set of curriculum to train your NCOs. Then the question is, every time you bring new technology in, you bring new skill set in, then the question is, what are you going to drop? How are you going to introduce the new system? How are you going to bring new technology on board? How are you going to train your soldier? Then you're grappling with the curriculum. What are you going to bring in? What are you going to drop? How you balance the basics that you still need to keep. And this is one of the struggles that we always have, because technology is always improving. The question is, how much time do we have to train the soldier to up to a certain level to fit this in technology, understand this technology, and then the next thing you know, a new one comes in. So the biggest challenge we have is always time.
Right.
And this is one that we need to grapple with, and we need to be very careful how we fit it into the system, how we bring the new technology online, and how to also maintain the basics. Because if you start to lose the basic, and you use the technology, like simple thing, GPS. Everyone's using GPS, but once battery's dead, satellites down, nobody knows how to use a map and compass. And this is something we are worried about, and it is a reality, something that to check back on.
Yeah. A perishable skill.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. Jay? Did you?
I happen to agree with Command Sergeant Major Smith.
That's the first.
No.
You better.
I do think that the lack of resources is going to hurt us a little bit because we're kind of creating the army of haves and have-nots. And so you got the tick brigades that are getting all the latest technologies. So they're getting the SRRs, the MRRs, they're getting the lassos, the steeds, the SMITs. And so how do we keep pace? How do we still talk about it outside of those brigades?
Right.
Because if something kicks off, they've got to be aware. And so as NCOs, it's kind of our responsibility, even though we're not in a tick brigade, that we need to start talking this technology.
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about, the lethality prevailing or emerging technology. And so when we're talking about transforming in contact, it's intended to put systems in the hands of soldiers faster and in a timely manner. This is technically and programmatically possible, but it will mean a different version in soldiers' hands over time. So this means retaining more complex maintenance issues. Is this a limit? And then can soldiers adapt? What must the big Army do to better enable, and I would say big Army as it applies, enable the NCOs upon who the load will fall? Do you want me to say it again? I'm looking at faces. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I understand the question.
So it's essentially the equipment, the way that Transform in Contact is intended is to get equipment in hands faster. Obviously, over time, that equipment is going to change, kind of back to the GPS comment that you just made. And then there's going to be, with every iteration, more complex maintenance issues. So do we feel that there's a limit to this? And how can soldiers better adapt, since they will be the ones that are going to have to continuously train on this?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a limit to it, because I'm not privy to what resources and all that are out there. But I'll tell you, the best way to test whether something's going to be effective is to put it in the hand of the soldiers that employ it, because they'll figure out how to break it.
Oh,
and they'll figure out how to break it very rapidly.
Yes.
Right? They'll also figure out how to fix it. And then when you think about, whether there's a maintenance trail or a contract trail, whatever that may be. I mean, we've been to combat, right? Everybody says it, but we haven't been to war at the scale, right? Those types of things, we're not going to have that type of, in my opinion, logistics trail be out there on the battlefield that we may see in the future. So it's going to have to be a soldier that fits it, right? So I think the tech that's being fielded is user-friendly. It's probably intuitive during those times when you put it in the soldier touch points, the hands like that, they give that feedback. So I think the maintenance and all those things, at least for some of the smaller end, you know, technological advances in equipment that may be coming will be handled by soldiers, right? Some of the more exquisite stuff, you probably might not have that ability, but.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead.
Not all across the technical side of it, but you know, the one thing that pops out for me is that NCOs are trusted. So we have to step up and have those hard conversations with our commanders. Okay, you want me to do this maintenance, you want me to keep these, you know, this platform working, it's going to come at a cost, time, that I can't do this. And then let commanders make the choice of what's important because they've got the overall perspective. So capitalise on the fact that as NCOs, we are trusted within the organisation to have those conversations. And at the end of the day, it's our commanders who have the responsibility, the ownership, to make those decisions.
Right.
And there's another thought to kind of go on where Kim was going with it too, right? And it's also, you know, kind of seeing what type of risk, right, our commanders will take with some of these things.
Right.
When you think of like 3D printing, for example, you get that in, and we viewed some pieces out in an undisclosed unit out there, right? But they could 3D print things that were patented and, you know, may or may not have to be safety inspected by 80 levels of bureaucracy, right? Technology enables you to do those same types of things. But can you get, you know, the release of the patent? Can you get, you know, can you employ this without this person that can only safety inspect that, right? So some of the things that are in place for the right reasons, we may have to come to our commanders and ask, hey, will you accept this risk?
Right.
Because this is the only thing that can print this part out on this island, and it's going to take us 6 weeks possibly to get it out there.
Right. No, 100%. You wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll expand on the word ownership from Kim. I think ownership is the biggest. From Singapore Army, we are a conscript army. So we have a biggest challenge because you have maintenance issue, we have more platforms. But the problem for us is a conscript army, the soldiers don't treat the equipment as part of their own. So they will use it, and then if it's spoiled, they just throw it back for the maintenance. Right. And that's the biggest challenge we have. Because your maintenance number is, the crew is small, but your logistic chain is big. And this is something that we're grappling with to make sure that our conscript army understand what's meaning of ownership. Especially with the generation now we have, the Gen Zs.
Right.
They don't really appreciate ownership that much. To them is, I just use it, put it one side, maintenance will settle for me. But if we can broach the idea of ownership for them, especially in Singapore context, it wins the battle for us. Because if they treat the equipment as if it is really their own, then we won't have a lot of downtime. And that's one thing that we are really looking into.
No, that's a good point. So this is the last question that I can do. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. But I'm also going to allow you to use that for your closing comments as well. So in no particular order, could you share a vignette about your hardest challenges faced to date in developing our NCOs and soldiers?
You want me to go, or you need more time?
Do I have to call on someone?
I took the last. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges. You know, I mean, I wouldn't think that I have one of there's probably many crucibles when you look at leader development out there. I think probably the biggest thing for me where I'm at in this position is why I talked about the Pacific Enlisted Leader Development Strategy, right? It's synchronizing efforts, right? Because there's a lot of great initiatives out here and people with great intentions. But if those efforts aren't synchronized across the region, at least from the land force design, then it's like a bad CrossFit workout, right? You got the USERPAC doing something, State Partnership doing something, SFAB doing something, our joint partners doing something, multinational partners, right? And if we're all trying to help a country and we're all saying different things, it's going to be bad, right? We're just going to confuse them. Instead of having an indelible impact in the right way to help them, we're just confusing them, right? So one of the big things I wrestle with is trying to make sure that we as an Army out here in the Pacific, that if somebody is asking for some assistance by invitation with their consent and at their pace, that we're not doing redundant efforts.
Right.
And then also deconflicting things, right? So like if a land force goes down to an area like Kim's in Oceania, right? The primacy normally they're operating under Australian and New Zealand doctrine.
Right.
So you don't want the big army to come down there and start undoing things in those regions, right? So I think one of the hardest things as far as leader development is helping to synchronize all those efforts that we're doing across the region so that they have positive impacts in lieu of, just a bunch of, things where we collapse that we've done something and nothing's actually been done.
Right. Sinchi?
Yeah. I think as NCOs, it's not about always providing leadership training and mentorship. This is not only enough. I think it's also important to also give our NCOs the purpose of why they don their uniform. Only when they understand their purpose, then they will lead and train our soldiers well. So the purpose is always a key word. If everybody understands what's the purpose, the rest is easy. And as NCOs in the Indo-Pacific, I think we should continue to strive to build a stronger bond.
Right.
I think then only we can become a big, in Hawaiian I think it's ohana. And that's most important because you won't know when the next day you're going to be working with your counterparts. And that's always the biggest thing.
For me, I think that the challenge that we've got, or certainly I've got, is ensuring the readiness. And I spoke a bit about that earlier on. Just because of life. Soldiers could be ready one day, not necessarily ready the next. And we learnt that the hard way a couple of years ago when we needed to deploy a combat team on an operation, and what we thought were ready were not. And the consequences of that are soldiers being left behind, and nobody wants to be left behind. Whilst we don't want war, we absolutely want to be deployable. So that constant battle with making sure that we are ready, not only individually, collectively in teams, but also in family, I think is the biggest challenge that we've got at the moment.
And the only thing that I would add, concur with all three, and I'd just add that leadership development challenges, you got to embrace those. That's where you learn the most as a leader, is you embrace those challenges. Anyone can lead, all-stars. That's pretty easy. But you try to lead some soldiers that have some challenges, that's where you grow the most.
Yeah, agreed. And how you embrace those challenges and lead through it is also critical. So thank you so much for all of you for sticking it out with us. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for such a thought-provoking discussion about our greatest resource, which is our people, and how we continue to develop the next generation of our armies. Thank you.
I don't know about all of you. I'm going to sleep a lot better tonight knowing we have this unbelievable caliber of senior non-commissioned officer. We're in great shape. What a tremendous panel. Thank you very much. Tremendous. Let's hear it again.
Thank you, sir.
You're free to leave. Great job. Super. Hey, tomorrow, last morning, boy, we've got some tremendous. We'll start off with what I know will be a fantastic keynote from Lieutenant General Simon Stewart. He's amazing, and that'll be a great presentation. Then a great panel on the reserve's key role in the Pacific, and following up, closeout is Xavier Brunson, General Brunson from Korea, United Nations Command, Combined Command, U.S. Forces Command Korea, an amazing leader with our final keynote tomorrow morning. So you won't want to miss it. 8 o'clock breakfast, free chow, and then 9 o'clock in here. We'll see you tomorrow.